The crackdown on scam centers in Cambodia explains a lot, but not in the way most people expect. At first, it looks like a straightforward story. A government passes a new law, authorities carry out raids, arrests are made, and foreign workers are repatriated. On the surface, it feels like a long overdue response to online fraud. But if you look a little closer, the scale of the crackdown tells you something much bigger. It tells you how large this industry had already become, how organized it was, and how many layers were involved in keeping it running. This is not just a story about stopping scams. It is a story about exposing an entire system that had been operating in plain sight. What makes this moment important is that it is not just one action. It is several things happening at once. New laws targeting cyber fraud more directly, international pressure building through sanctions and scrutiny, law enforcement activity increasing inside the country, and at the same time, reports of thousands of foreign workers being rescued or repatriated from scam compounds. When all of these pieces move together, it signals that the problem is not small and it is not new. It suggests that what is being addressed now is something that had already grown into a structured cross-border industry. The existence of large-scale scam compounds is one of the clearest signs of that structure. These are not scattered individuals working independently. These are centralized operations, buildings or clusters of buildings where large numbers of people are working at the same time, often running similar types of scams: fake investments, romance scams, impersonation fraud, and other digital schemes targeting victims in different countries. The setup often looks less like random internet crime and more like a coordinated business environment with roles, systems, and processes in place. And that is where the crackdown becomes revealing, because when authorities start dismantling these operations, they're not just shutting down websites or blocking accounts. They are physically entering locations, removing people, seizing equipment, and breaking up organized groups. That alone tells you that the scam economy is not just digital. It has a physical footprint. It requires infrastructure. It depends on coordination. And once you realize that, the scale of the problem becomes much harder to ignore. Another part of the story that explains a lot is the issue of recruitment. Many of the people found inside these compounds were not simply hired in the normal sense. They were brought in through misleading job offers, promises of legitimate work, or opportunities that turned out to be something completely different. Once inside, their situation often changed. Freedom of movement could be restricted, communication could be controlled, and the pressure to participate in scam operations could become very real. That means the crackdown is not just about stopping fraud against victims abroad. It is also about addressing the conditions inside these operations. This dual-layer reality is what makes the entire system so complex. On one side, there are victims losing money through online scams. On the other side, there are individuals inside the system who may also be under pressure, coercion, or control. When authorities begin repatriating workers, it highlights that the industry is not just exploiting trust, it can also exploit labor. That changes how the whole system needs to be understood. It is not only a financial crime problem, it is also a human problem. The international angle is another reason this crackdown explains so much. When outside governments begin imposing sanctions or increasing pressure, it signals that the issue has crossed borders in a meaningful way. Victims are not limited to one country. Money flows across jurisdictions. Recruitment networks span multiple regions, and enforcement becomes more complicated because different legal systems, financial channels, and political environments are involved. The presence of international pressure suggests that the scam economy has grown large enough to affect relationships between countries, not just individuals. At the same time, the financial side of the system cannot be ignored. These operations depend on moving money quickly and efficiently. That often involves layers of accounts, intermediaries, digital payment systems, and sometimes newer tools like cryptocurrency. The more complex the financial pipeline becomes, the harder it is to track and stop. That's why shutting down physical locations is only part of the solution. If the money channels remain active, the system can find ways to rebuild or relocate. And this is where the limitations of a crackdown become clear. Raids, arrests, and new laws can disrupt operations, sometimes significantly. They can reduce visible activity, break up specific groups, and create immediate pressure. But they don't automatically remove the underlying incentives. As long as the business model remains profitable, and as long as there are gaps in enforcement or coordination, there is always a risk that the system adapts. It can shift locations, change tactics, or reorganize under new structures. That doesn't mean the crackdown is ineffective. It means it's only part of a larger process. To understand why, you have to look at how these systems grow in the first place. They grow because they combine several powerful elements at once. Digital communication that allows easy access to victims anywhere in the world, financial systems that can move money across borders quickly, recruitment channels that can bring in workers from different regions, and local conditions that may allow operations to expand before they face serious resistance. When all of those elements align, the industry can scale faster than traditional enforcement methods.
The Cambodia crackdown is important because it interrupts that alignment. It raises the cost of operating. It increases the risk of being caught. It sends a signal to both operators and those connected to them that the environment is changing. And it forces the system to react. But the reaction is not always disappearance. Sometimes it is adaptation. That is why these events are best understood not as endings, but as turning points. There is also a perception shift happening here. For a long time, many people saw online scams as something distant and individual. A person receives a message, makes a mistake, loses money. The focus stayed on the victim's experience. What this crackdown does is shift attention toward the structure behind the message. It makes people ask different questions. Where are these messages coming from? Who is organizing them? How are they funded? Who benefits? And what conditions allow them to continue? Once those questions become part of the conversation, the story changes. It stops being about isolated incidents and starts being about systems. And systems are harder to deal with than individuals. They require coordination between countries. They require tracking financial flows across borders. They require addressing recruitment practices and labor conditions. They require consistent enforcement over time, not just short bursts of activity. This is why the combination of new laws, enforcement actions, international pressure, and repatriations matters so much. Each piece targets a different part of the system. Laws define what is illegal and increase penalties. Enforcement disrupts operations on the ground. International pressure raises the cost of ignoring the problem. Repatriations address the human side and reduce the available labor pool inside these compounds. Together, they form a more complete response than any single action on its own. But even with all of that, the underlying challenge remains. The scam economy is flexible. It is not tied to one platform, one location, or one method. It can evolve with technology. It can shift geographically. It can change how it recruits, how it communicates, and how it moves money. That means the long-term outcome of this crackdown depends on whether the pressure can be sustained and whether it can extend across borders in a coordinated way. In the end, the Cambodia Scam Center crackdown explains a lot because it exposes what the global scam industry has really become. It shows that this is not just a collection of small crimes. It is an organized, transnational system with physical infrastructure, financial networks, and human consequences. It shows how digital fraud connects to real-world operations, and it reveals that behind every message, every fake profile, and every convincing pitch, there may be a much larger structure at work. The crackdown does not just tell us that authorities are taking action, it tells us why that action was necessary in the first place. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to go back to the idea that scams are just random events happening on the internet. They are part of something bigger. And this time, that bigger system is finally being forced into the open.